to our show, and welcome back after COVID. This is our first show in about 3 years. Education in the community. I am your host, Reverend Robert L. McKnight. I have as my guest a former schoolmate and a former colleague at Berkeley High School, Mr. Gene Nakamoura, known as Coach, one of the winningest coaches in women's basketball in the Bay Area. Welcome, Coach.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And we're going to take you back a while. Look at some of the history of sports at Berkeley High School, and we're going to look at Berkeley Unified School District as well as changes at Berkeley High School. Coach, let's begin. Give us some background. I know we were at, you don't have to mention the year, but I know we were at Berkeley High together. I graduated the year before you. Where did you go to elementary school, we called it then?
I grew up on the corner of Posen and Monterey, right across from St. Mary's High School. And I went to Jefferson.
You went to
kindergarten through 6th grade.
And Jefferson is located on Sacramento Street.
Rose and Sacramento.
Yes. And where did you go once you left Jefferson?
I went
after
to Garfield.
6th
Garfield Junior High, which was
the privileged school.
7, 8, 9.
And what happened after the completion of the 9th grade at Garfield?
Then I was promoted to and went to Berkeley High School from 10th, 11th, and 12th grades.
Good. Give us a little background. What was it like in the early 60s being at Berkeley High that were no longer in existence when you returned as a member of the staff?
You know, the big thing that you noticed physically was the new buildings that they have there, and the fact that when I went to the high school, they used to have a place called the Slope.
Yes.
And during that time, they had social clubs, both girls and boys social clubs, and they would sit out there, during lunchtime and, carouse and talk and eat and whatever. But that was all gone when I came back because, they had done construction and that was basically all wiped out.
Now tell me something about the social clubs. What do you mean they had social clubs at Berkeley High? Were they sponsored by Berkeley High?
I really couldn't tell you whether they were sponsored. They had to be sponsored, because they were allowed to exist on campus. Basically, they were mostly Caucasian social clubs. There were different groups. One group was, more of the athletes.
Yes.
And that was called the Yanoyas, and they were like a non-drinking social club.
Non-drinking.
Yeah.
Nice.
Then they had one called the Athenians.
Yeah.
They were drinkers. They had one called the Corinthians. They were rebel-rousers. They had one called the Grecians.
Yeah.
And then the girls, they had their social clubs. I really can't remember all the names of the girls, but they had girls' social clubs too.
Memory serves me correctly, they were not sponsored by the school. It was like a separate society that existed off campus. And they had the adult versions of them as well. Our producer has a friend, Jeffrey, Mr. Broussard, and Jeffrey's place was owned, if memory serves me correctly, by one of the social clubs. And it was off limits to African Americans. and then Jeffrey purchased that building.
You know, during the time from 60 to 62 that I was there, basically the social clubs were for juniors and seniors.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like a social club that you would have at the university, where they would be rushed and they would be invited, you know, and to be a member. It was, they'd have parties. You know, I actually was an Illinoisan.
You were not.
I was in Illinois, and I got rushed, I got asked, and I joined the club, and although after I joined the club, I went to hardly any of the social events. I don't know, I had, you know how you change?
Yeah.
And at that time, you want to be involved in something, but once you get involved in something, you find out that you don't want to be so involved.
Yeah.
So, you know, I had another group of friends.
Now we can stay here for at least 3 different shows just talking about the history of those clubs.
Yeah.
And a dean at that time by the name of Mr. Tom Parker. But we're going to move on. Of course, that was all gone when you returned as a staff member. What position did you first occupy in the district when you came back?
Well, when I started in the district, I started teaching at Thousand Oaks Elementary off of Solano.
You were an elementary teacher?
I taught, in my career of teaching, I taught every grade except for kindergarten. So I started out in the first, second, third grades under Principal Jack McFarland. And I taught there for 7 years. And I taught first, second, third, and combinations thereof. And then from there, I wanted to see what the follow-through was from K3 to 4-6. So I actually transferred to Malcolm X down in South Berkeley.
That's where I met you.
And that was principal there. It was a new principal, former teacher at Berkeley High School. His name was Jeff Tedisco, who was an outstanding principal, outstanding person. And I taught there for 4th, 5th, and 6th grades and combinations thereof for about 4 or 5 years. And then he was promoted to Willard Junior High in 1980 after they had done their earthquake reconstruction.
Yes.
And he brought me up there with him. And I taught math there. And eventually I became a vice principal there. And under Christine Lim and Marilyn Davis was a vice principal along with myself. And we had very good times there. And then from there, I went down to the high school as assistant athletic director and head of the PE department. And at the time I was coaching basketball, so it was a chance for me to get closer to my players. So I was down there for 4 or 5 years. And from there, they asked me to become head of student services. So I was the gatekeeper for the district, down the district office. And I did that for 1 year. And during that 1 year, I did 65 expulsions. And I knew more than half of the people that were being expelled.
Yeah.
And so it was like a no-win situation for me. So I told them I didn't want to come back as the head of student services. And so I was given job of vice principal at Longfellow Middle School, along with a new principal. And it was, at the time, Longfellow was the lowest ranked achieving school of the 3 middle schools in Berkeley. And within 4 years, Rebecca Chung, who was a new principal there, raised their academic standards. So at the end of 4 years, they were the highest achieving school. She was an amazing administrator. But we had a good time there, and and that's basically where I retired from the district in 2007.
Now, how many years were you coach of the women's basketball team?
Well, I started in 1983 and 84. That was a unusual situation because I fell into the position. I had, at the time there was Proposition 13, so they had no after-school sports.
Yes.
And I was at Willard. And some boys, 8th grade boys, came up to me and asked me if I would coach them. And so I provided the uniforms. I was the bus driver. I was the van driver. And we formed a team. And Stelton Mitchell, who at that time was the girls' varsity coach at the high school, heard about me and came up to Willard and told me that he would provide buses, uniforms, I would, and plus I'd get paid. So if I were to become his JV coach. So I went down that next season in 93, 94, and 83, 84, and became his JV coach. And the very next year, the varsity boys coach retired. Stelton took over the boys position, and I fell into the varsity girls position.
Now let me ask you, it was a tradition almost for the girls to go to the state championship. How many times did you appear? Do you recall?
Yeah, we won 9 times.
9 times.
9 times, and we won 9 NorCal championships. We won 15 section championships.
Yes.
In fact, we won 9 in a row at one point. We were pretty good.
You were outstanding. You were outstanding. I had forgotten that Stelton Mitchell. I recall him at boys varsity. I forgot that he also had a stint there as the girls varsity coach. Now, what was your last year as coach of the girls?
2007, I believe. I believe it was 2007.
Your last year, that's the year.
I had retired and sat out a year, and then the coach Cheryl,
I remember her.
Yeah.
She was a student.
She became ill, and so while she was recovering, I took back the position for 1 year, and then she came back and
she played under you as a student, right?
She was my JV coach.
Yeah.
For a number of years.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember her. Now, one of the things, to switch just quickly, you mentioned Miss Chung. Can't think of her first name. Give it to me. Rebecca. And how she brought Longfellow from the bottom to the top. It occurred to me as I hear the reports on the condition in public education. Do you think that it would work if a group of veteran teachers, now retired and administrators, could be brought back into the system to work with the current staff?
It's interesting that you make that point, because Rebecca Chung, after she was principal of Longfellow, became the head of testing for the school district. And after that, she is now the head of the principal's leadership group or college or at the University of California. So she is guiding all these principals and future principals with her knowledge and leadership.
I'm trying to think of who she replaced as head of that.
That I don't know.
And that's good to hear.
Yeah.
That she's training future administrators.
Yes.
But I think that it would work, administrators such as yourself and former teachers, if we could build a coalition amongst them and then negotiate something with public education. I think what is lacking now is that we have administrators and educators, but they do not have any institutional memory.
You know, while you're bringing that up, I have to point out, my wife's niece is the former superintendent of Santa Rosa School District. And while she was superintendent, they went through the floods, they went through the fires.
Yes.
And she did an outstanding job. You know, she's well known in the state. Matter of fact, she got superintendent of the year. Rebecca has hired her as one of her speakers. So my niece, J.Nakamoura, goes there once a week and instructs, gives speeches to the principals and help give them leadership hints. So, and that's just like Rebecca. She gets the top people to come and help out with the program.
That's excellent. What would be your recommendation to change what is going on in public education? Seldom do we hear anything positive. Generally, it's always a negative report about the failure. I heard at one point, maybe it was the state, someone said that the students who were behind would never catch up after the pandemic.
Boy, that's a hard one. I think that's going to take a few years. It's going to take a few years. To me, not only do you have to get the students back in line, but you also have to get the instructors, the teachers, because they face hardships too. Not having kids in classes, having online learning, and to get the kids back in the schools, I think is key.
What can we do to reach those who have fallen through the cracks? We have a frightening percentage of school-age children, even I would venture to say from kindergarten, due to what is happening in the economy, people who are displaced without any permanent residency, all the way through seniors who should be in school. They're not in school. Many of them have not been in school since the pandemic. You think there's a way that they can be reached, or do we just write them off?
I honestly think you have to communicate. You have to get the communication through to the parents first. That to me that's primary, and because that's the main communication with the kids is with their own parents, and so get them with the positive feelings about the public schools, get them back to the schools. That to me is a key ingredient. But it's going to take a few years. The pandemic has really affected a lot of people, and I don't know if I'm the expert enough to give you the answers to that. Yeah.
But I wanted to solicit your observation because you excelled in that field. And as you compare the decades from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2 decades in 2000, that's a lot of experience there. What would be one of the major changes you have noticed in the decades that you have been involved in public education?
Discipline and attitude. I think attitudes of parents has changed. You know, the whole fact that we are under a media onslaught, you know, everything's changing media-wise, and, you know, where before, back in the old days, all the OG people out there, you know, what was told by your parents was believed as truth, and
Yeah, that was law.
and now there's so much stuff out there online that you know, there's a questioning of, you know, and a believing of, you know, what is true, you know, what's going on out there, because you know, online you can get so many different opinions. That's very, very hard.
I have to smile at that because of the influence of technology. I left the first time in 2009, and especially prior to that. I would not allow for any electronic devices to be visible in the classroom. And now they are essential
Yeah.
to learning.
I mean, just watch people out in public. You know, what do they have in front of their faces? They're their phones. They're not paying attention to anything else but their phones. So, you know, that's a tough battle. That's a tough battle that we face. But again, we've got to get the kids back to where they want to come to school.
That's true.
You know, where they enjoy the teachers who are teaching them, enjoy the subjects. That's a big battle.
A big battle.
A big battle. Yeah.
Now, one of the things, and I don't think he would mind me mentioning his name, a former colleague, Mr. Doug Powers, would always say to me, because we would teach, he taught theoretical psychology, and I taught African psychology. And we had such a great time. And he would say to me, Bob, I hope the word never gets out. But do you know, I think you, like me, we would do this even if they wouldn't pay us. And he was right. We were having such a great time. Enjoying what we were doing, watching the growth of the students.
Yeah.
Watching them change in terms of their personal expectation from one year to the next, because most of them stayed with us from grade 10 through 12. And there was this personal commitment on behalf of most of those who came into education in the 60s when we came into education. One of them you just showed me on Facebook. The late Dr. Richard D. Navies would say there are two categories of educators: those who are committed and those who are incompetent.
Oh.
And
I would say less committed.
And I don't think we're seeing the commitment and dedication that we once saw. And that's for several reasons. Number one, we see the change in the economy, the cost of living. We have educators who now cannot afford to live in the community in which they are teaching. And they're having to become bivocational. They teach, plus they're doing something else. And I think that impacts it. Would you like to close out on that?
Oh yeah, it brings back many memories of, you know. But to me, the challenge that you and I faced going into teaching was not as complicated, not as intense as what teachers face today.
That's right. I agree.
You know, for me to tell somebody, to be more committed, whatever. The challenges are so much greater now.
Much greater.
Yeah, and teaching is it's so rewarding, but our society is changing so fast that it just challenges the ability of people to teach in the class. Yeah.
I think one of the priorities that we should have in all countries, but we're talking about in this society, is paying our educators more money. And because they deserve it, because they are responsible for developing the leaders of tomorrow. What greater responsibility can you have other than shaping the minds of the next generation? And I think they should be rewarded for that.
I agree.
Rather than so undervalued. I want to thank you for joining us today in Education in the Community, and I want to welcome you back to our show. I want to say thank you to Mr. Nakamoura. He was my schoolmate and my colleague. Thank you so very much.
And we didn't even talk about basketball.
We did not. And I meant to ask you about the difference in basketball today than when you started out. We had a brief conversation about this before.
We could have a whole nother show on that.
We could. Now let's look at this. Look at prep sports today as compared to prep sports in the early 90s. That's not that long ago for me.
The thing is, the game has changed a lot. The game of the three-pointer.
We don't have that.
So you look, it's almost like when you watch basketball now, it's almost like they're playing playground.
You're right. Now, let me sign off on this section. And we're going to have Gene back again, and we're going to talk about basketball. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.